What if the dead leaves rotting in your backyard are part of a global industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars? What if the plant material that farmers burn, that forests shed, that rivers carry to the sea every single year is not waste at all, but raw material for one of the most profitable supply chains on Earth? Every day, plants grow, age, and die in a cycle so ordinary that almost nobody questions it. But what if certain industries have spent centuries learning how to intercept that cycle and turn it into extraordinary profit? What if the paper in your hands, the fuel in your car, the medicine in your cabinet, and the fabric on your body all trace their origin back to the same invisible source? And here is the clue that makes this story strange. One of the world's most valuable industrial materials comes entirely from dead plant cells, and most people use it every single day without knowing its origin. Has anyone ever asked where a plant goes when it dies? Not philosophically. Practically. A tree falls in a forest. Crops are harvested, and their stalks are left behind. Seaweed washes ashore and dries in the sun. Grasses dry and collapse at the end of autumn. What happens to all of that biological material? Where does it go? And does anyone profit from the journey? For most of human history, the answer was simple. Dead plant matter decomposed, returned its nutrients to the soil, and the cycle continued. Nature managed the process efficiently and without human intervention. But somewhere along the way, humans discovered something that changed everything. Dead plant material, in various forms and at various stages of decomposition, could be transformed. It could be processed, refined, compressed, dissolved, and reconstructed into products that nature never intended, but that industrial economies desperately need. Which industries discovered this first? Which ones have built their entire foundation on plant material that most people would consider agricultural waste? And how did a biological process as ancient as photosynthesis become the backbone of supply chains worth more than the GDP of entire nations? The answer is not obvious. It does not announce itself. It hides inside the packaging of everyday products, inside the fuel that powers transportation networks, inside the medicines that sit in hospitals on every continent. And it connects directly back to that original clue. The material that most people encounter daily without ever tracing it back to a dead plant cell. What is it? And how did it end up in so many places at once? Think about what a plant actually is at a molecular level. A plant is, among other things, a construction project. It spends its entire life converting sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide into physical structure. Cellulose, lignin, hemicellulose, starch. These are the building blocks of plant tissue, and they represent some of the most chemically versatile raw materials on Earth. When a plant dies, those molecules do not disappear. They remain, locked inside the dry matter waiting. And certain industries learned how to unlock them. Consider something as commonplace as paper. Every sheet of paper you have ever touched began as living plant fiber. Wood pulp mostly, but also cotton, bamboo, sugarcane bagasse, and agricultural residue from rice and wheat harvests. The global paper industry processes hundreds of millions of tons of plant material every year, transforming cellulose fibers into products that range from tissue paper to industrial packaging to the specialty papers used in surgical environments and aerospace applications. But paper is only the beginning. What about biofuels? Ethanol, one of the most widely used fuel additives in the world, is produced primarily by fermenting plant sugars, from corn in the United States, from sugarcane in Brazil, from wheat and sugar beet in Europe. The plant grows, dies, is harvested, and the sugars locked in its cells are converted by microorganisms into fuel that powers hundreds of millions of vehicles. And what about pharmaceuticals? How many people know that a significant proportion of active pharmaceutical ingredients are derived from plant alkaloids, terpenes, and other compounds found in dried and processed plant matter? That the bark of a dead yew tree was the original source of a cancer-fighting compound that has saved millions of lives? That willow bark, long dried and ground, was the botanical precursor to aspirin? Is it possible that the full scale of what dead plants power has never been properly communicated to the people whose lives depend on it entirely? To understand how this industry actually functions, you need to understand that it is not one industry at all. It is a network of overlapping industries, each one finding a different way to extract value from the same fundamental raw material, dead and processed plant matter. The first pathway is mechanical. Physical plant fiber is harvested, cleaned, and mechanically broken down into its component parts. Wood chips are ground into pulp for paper. Hemp stalks are reft and combed into long fibers for textile production. Bamboo is split and pressed into structural panels for construction. In each case, the process is essentially physical. The plant material is transformed by force and heat rather than chemistry. The result is a product whose origin in plant tissue is still recognizable, even if the form has changed completely. The second pathway is chemical. Here, the plant material is dissolved, treated with reagents, and reconstructed into something that no longer resembles its source at all. Viscose rayon, one of the most widely used textile fibers in the world, is produced by dissolving wood pulp in chemical solutions and extruding it through spinnerets as a liquid that solidifies into fiber. Cellulose acetate, used in photographic film and cigarette filters, follows a similar process. The plant disappears chemically and re-emerges as something entirely new. The third pathway is biological. Microorganisms, bacteria, yeasts, and fungi are used to break down complex plant carbohydrates into simpler compounds that can then be used as fuels, solvents, or chemical feedstocks. Bioethanol fermentation is the most familiar example, but the same biological logic applies to the production of lactic acid for biodegradable plastics, citric acid for food and pharmaceuticals, and a growing range of industrial chemicals currently being developed as alternatives to petroleum-derived compounds. What connects all three pathways? The raw material at the start is always the same. A dead or harvested plant, stripped of moisture, reduced to its essential chemistry, and fed into a process that extracts every unit of value before the residue is discarded or composted back into the cycle. Is it any wonder that the industries built on this material have been growing consistently for over a century and show no sign of slowing? What is the actual economic scale of what we are describing? Is it possible to put numbers to an industry this diffuse, this ancient, and this deeply embedded in the global economy? Consider the global paper and pulp market alone. It generates revenues exceeding $500 billion annually. That number has remained remarkably stable even as digital media has reduced demand for printing paper, because the rise of e-commerce has driven explosive growth in packaging demand. Every cardboard box that arrives at your door, every paper bag at a grocery store, every corrugated shipping container moving through the global supply chain. All of it begins as plant fiber. The global biofuels market adds another layer. Bioethanol and biodiesel together represent a market currently valued at well over $150 billion and growing as transportation industries around the world face pressure to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels. Brazil's sugar-cane ethanol industry alone employs over 1 million people and supplies fuel to hundreds of millions of vehicles. The textile industry built on plant-derived fibers, cotton, linen, bamboo, viscose rayon, lyocell, represents additional hundreds of billions in annual economic value. Over half of the world's textile fiber production is derived from plant sources, either directly as natural fiber or indirectly as chemically processed cellulose. And the pharmaceutical industry, the construction materials sector, the food ingredient industry, the cosmetics sector, each one draws significantly from plant-derived compounds processed from agricultural and forestry residues. The true aggregate economic value of industries built on dead plant material is measured not in billions, but in multiple trillions of dollars annually. Does any other raw material generate this much industrial value from something that is, at its origin, simply organic matter that a plant no longer needs? Now return to the clue that has been waiting at the center of this story since the very first sentence. The material that most people use every single day without knowing it comes from dead plant cells. Something so common, so embedded in daily life, that its origin has become completely invisible. Something whose discovery transformed manufacturing, and whose continued production depends on a global network of farms, forests, chemical plants, and supply chains connecting dozens of countries. Why is this detail strange? Why does it seem unexpected that something so ubiquitous could have a plant origin that nobody mentions? Because the product in question looks nothing like a plant. It feels nothing like a plant. It behaves like a synthetic material, has properties that seem engineered rather than grown, and is manufactured in facilities that look nothing like farms or forests. The transformation from raw plant fiber to finished product is so complete, so thorough, and so chemically complex that the biological origin has been effectively erased. And yet the origin is real. The plant fiber went in at one end. The product came out at the other. Every step in between involved chemistry, engineering, and industrial process, but none of those steps created the raw material. They only transformed it. This is the detail that reveals the hidden architecture of the entire industry. Value in this sector does not come from inventing new raw materials. It comes from inventing new ways to transform an ancient one. The plant grew because of sunlight, water, and soil. The profit came from what someone decided to do with it after it died. What other industries are waiting to be built on the same logic? And how many more times can the same dead plant cell be transformed into something the world has never seen before? Here is the truth. The industry that turns dead plants into global profit is not one discoverable company or one identifiable sector. It is a fundamental economic logic, the logic of biological transformation, applied across dozens of industries simultaneously, generating value at every stage of the process from field to finished product. The mysterious material at the center of this story is cellulose, the most abundant organic polymer on Earth, the structural backbone of every plant that has ever lived, and the raw material from which paper, textile fiber, biofuel, biodegradable plastic, food thickeners, pharmaceutical coatings, and dozens of other products are manufactured at industrial scale every single day. Cellulose is in the paper this script might be printed on. It is in the viscose lining of your jacket. It is in the capsule coating of the supplement you took this morning. It is in the thickener that gives your salad dressing its consistency. It is in the biodegradable packaging being developed to replace petroleum-based plastic. It is the foundation on which multiple trillion-dollar industries rest, and almost nobody who uses its products can name it or trace it back to the field, forest, or agricultural residue where it began. The industries built on cellulose did not advertise their raw material. They advertised their products. The paper industry sold convenience. The textile industry sold style. The pharmaceutical industry sold health. The raw material underneath all of them remained invisible, unnamed, and unnoticed, exactly as the industry preferred. The next time you tear a piece of paper, fold a cardboard box, or button a shirt made from viscose, ask yourself a question that almost nobody asks. What did this used to be? It used to be alive. It used to be growing somewhere, converting sunlight into structure, building the cellular walls that are now, in a different form, in your hands. The plant that grew those walls has been dead for months or years. But its chemistry lives on, transformed through industrial processes into something completely unrecognizable, serving a purpose that no plant ever evolved to serve. The industry built on this transformation is older than modern chemistry, larger than most people can imagine, and more deeply woven into daily life than almost any other industry on Earth. It powers the packaging economy, the textile economy, the energy transition, and the future of biodegradable materials. It employs tens of millions of people across farming, forestry, chemical processing, manufacturing, and logistics. And all of it begins with something that falls to the ground every autumn, that floats down rivers, that dries in fields after harvest, that disappears so quietly that nobody thinks to ask where it went. Dead plants are not the end of a cycle. They are the raw material of an economy. And the question is not whether that economy will keep growing. The question is whether the people powering it with their consumption will ever think to look at where it begins.